I've always thought of the sea as my true mistress, restless, wild, and full of secrets. I spent most of my adult life working as a sailor aboard cargo ships, crossing vast oceans to places I could barely pronounce. The rhythm of the waves became my heartbeat, and the salty breeze my constant companion. My wife, Amy, knew this when we got married. Amy and I met in Boston, where I was stationed for a brief stint. She was the kind of woman who could light up a room just by walking into it. Her golden hair fell in waves over her shoulders, and her laugh, it was the kind of sound that could cut through even the heaviest fog. I fell for her hard, and within a year, we were married. It felt like a dream. But dreams, as I've learned, have a way of turning into nightmares. Our home was in Charleston, South Carolina. A quaint, whitewashed house with a wraparound porch, it overlooked a narrow inlet where pelicans often roost. Amy loved it there, or so I thought. When I shipped out, I would often imagine her sitting on the porch with a glass of iced tea, waiting for my return. The reality, as I would come to discover, was far different. The sea is a lonely place. When you're out there, with nothing but water in every direction, your mind drifts. You think of the life you've left behind, of home, of love, of Amy. I used to picture her busying herself with the little things that kept her grounded while I was away, painting the living room, tending to her garden, or visiting her sister in Atlanta. These thoughts comforted me. But there were cracks in the facade, even then. I just didn't see them. It was during a call home, somewhere in the middle of the Pacific, that I first felt it. Amy's voice was softer than usual, her words clipped. I asked her how things were, and she said everything was fine. Fine. A word that doesn't mean what it pretends to. I pressed her for details, but she brushed me off, saying she was tired from a long day. Looking back, I realize how blind I was. I chalked it up to the stress of me being away. She had warned me when we got married that my absences would be hard on her. "I'll try," she said back then, her eyes full of hope. "But it won't be easy." Weeks turned into months, and her letters became less frequent. The calls were shorter, her laughter absent. And then there were the unanswered messages, the times I called, and it went straight to voicemail. I convinced myself it was nothing, that she was just busy. But deep down, the first seed of doubt had been planted. When my ship docked in San Diego after a 3-month stretch at sea, I was eager to get home. The smell of land was intoxicating, but it was the thought of Amy that quickened my steps. I had called her the week before to tell her my schedule, and she promised to meet me at the airport in Charleston. She wasn't there. I waited for nearly an hour, watching as other passengers reunited with their loved ones. Smiles, hugs, laughter, it was all around me, yet I stood alone. I tried calling her, but there was no answer. Eventually, I hailed a cab and made my way home, carrying my sea bag and an uneasy feeling in my chest. The house was dark when I arrived. No porch light. No welcoming smile. I stepped inside, the smell of lavender air freshener faintly masking something else, something stale. I called out for Amy, but the only reply was the groan of the old wooden floor beneath my boots. Her car was in the driveway, so I knew she was home. Upstairs, the bedroom door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, expecting to see her asleep, but the bed was empty. That's when I heard a faint laugh, a man's laugh, coming from downstairs. Every muscle in my body tensed. My mind raced to make sense of it. Maybe she had a friend over. Maybe her brother. But no, I knew her brother's laugh. This was unfamiliar. I followed the sound to the den, where a soft glow seeped out from under the door. I could hear Amy's voice now, light and flirtatious, saying something I couldn't make out. My hand trembled as I turned the knob and stepped inside. What I saw stopped me cold. Amy was curled up on the couch, her legs draped over a man I didn't recognize. He had sandy blonde hair, an easy smile, and the kind of tan you only get from spending hours in the sun. They were sharing a bottle of wine, laughing at something on the television. It was so casual, so normal, that it made my stomach churn. "Who the hell is this?" I said, my voice low but shaking with anger. Amy froze, her eyes wide as she looked at me. The man sat up straight, his smile fading as he glanced between us. I didn't know you'd be back so soon," Amy stammered, her voice thin and full of panic. The man, trying to muster some courage, extended his hand toward me. "Hey, I'm Jason." I didn't take it. Jason's hand hung in the air for a moment before he awkwardly pulled it back, his face flushing under the weight of my glare. Amy stood abruptly, clutching her robe around her like it could shield her from the storm she knew was coming. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my voice louder now, the anger rising from deep within my chest. Amy opened her mouth, but no words came out. Jason, on the other hand, decided to speak. "Look, man, I didn't know." "Don't look, man, me," I barked, stepping toward him. He recoiled slightly, holding up his hands as if that could keep me at bay. "You're in my house, drinking my wine, with my wife. What the hell do you think you're doing?" Amy stepped between us, her hands up, palms outward. "John, stop. This isn't what it looks like." I laughed bitterly at that. "Oh, it's not? Then what is it, Amy? Enlighten me." Her face crumpled, and she cast a glance at Jason, who looked like he wished he could melt into the couch and disappear. "We were just talking," she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. "Talking?" I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "So that's what we're calling it now? Because from where I'm standing, it sure as hell doesn't look like just talking." Jason stood up, his hands still raised. "I should go," he muttered, inching toward the door. "Yeah, you should," I snapped, stepping aside to give him a clear path. He moved quickly, but before he left, he turned to Amy. "Call me," he said, his voice low, like he thought I wouldn't hear. "Get the hell out of here," I growled, and he didn't need to be told twice. When the door slammed shut behind him, the silence that followed was deafening. Amy stood there, her arms wrapped around herself, refusing to meet my eyes. I wanted her to say something, anything that could make sense of what I had just seen. But she didn't. Finally, I spoke. "How long?" Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. "What? How long, Amy?" My voice was quieter now, but no less sharp. "How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I found my answer. Amy stood frozen, her lips parted as if the truth were fighting to escape. But she stayed silent, and that silence was worse than anything she could have said. It confirmed everything. Was it just him? I pressed, my voice tight with barely contained rage. Or are there others I should know about? "No," she blurted out, shaking her head vehemently. "It's not like that, John." "Not like that?" I laughed bitterly. "You had another man in our house, Amy. You were laughing with him, drinking wine with him, while I was out in the middle of the goddamn ocean, working to keep this roof over our heads. So please, explain to me how it's not like that." Her eyes filled with tears, but they didn't move me. "Not this time. I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her voice trembling. "I was lonely, John. You're gone for months at a time, and I'm here, alone." Jason was just. "Convenient," I interrupted, finishing her sentence for her. She flinched at the word. "Someone to fill the void while I was gone." "That's not fair," she said, her voice rising. "You don't understand what it's like. To wake up every day in an empty house, to go to sleep without anyone to hold you. I'm not saying what I did was right, but don't act like you're some perfect husband who's never made mistakes." That stopped me cold. I stared at her, my anger momentarily eclipsed by disbelief. What mistakes have I made, Amy? Name one thing I've done that compares to this. She looked away, her silence damning. She couldn't name one, and we both knew it. The anger surged back, hotter this time. How long has it been going on? I asked again, my voice low and dangerous. A few months, she admitted, her eyes fixed on the floor. A few months, I repeated, as if saying it out loud would help me process it. I thought about all the times I'd called her, the letters I'd sent, the times I'd imagined her waiting for me with love in her heart. All of it a lie. And Jason? Who is he? I demanded. She hesitated, swallowing hard before continuing. He's a contractor. He worked on the kitchen remodel. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The kitchen remodel. The one she'd insisted on while I was away. She had sent me pictures of the finished work, bragging about how beautiful it looked. Now I understood why she had been so eager. The kitchen. Of course, it had to be the kitchen. I looked over at it now, the stainless steel appliances gleaming under the soft light. It was beautiful, I couldn't deny that. But knowing Jason had stood here, hammer in hand, while working his way into my wife's life, it made my stomach turn. I could picture them laughing, their voices echoing in the very space I had paid for. The betrayal stained every tile, every cabinet. So, what was it, Amy? I asked, my voice hollow. Did it start with flirting? Did you two exchange little smiles over countertops and paint samples until it just happened? She flinched but didn't answer, and that silence infuriated me more than any excuse she could have made. When? I demanded. When was the first time? Her lip quivered, and she seemed to shrink under the weight of my question. After the remodel was done, she admitted softly. He came by to check on things, and we had coffee. Coffee. I laughed darkly. Is that what they call it these days? Stop it, John, she snapped, the tears spilling over now. You think this is easy for me? You think I wanted this? I love you, but you're never here. You don't know what it's like to feel so invisible. Invisible? I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. Amy, I married you. I built a life with you. Every hour I spend out on that water is for you, for us. But instead of appreciating that, you let some guy waltz in and take my place because you were lonely? Do you even hear yourself? I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered, her voice breaking. It just happened. It just happened. I shook my head, my hands balling into fists at my sides. That's not how this works, Amy. You don't accidentally invite a man into your house. You don't accidentally share your bed with him. You made a choice. She looked at me then, her tear-streaked face filled with something like defiance. And you made a choice too, John. You chose the sea. You chose a life where you're gone more than you're here. I've spent years waiting for you, wondering if you even think about me when you're out there. Her words hit me like a rogue wave, knocking the wind out of me. I wanted to shout back, to tell her how wrong she was, but the truth was, she wasn't entirely wrong. I had chosen this life, and I knew it came at a cost. But I never thought that cost would be her. Amy's words hung in the air like a dense fog, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to counter her accusations, to defend myself, but part of me couldn't. She wasn't wrong about my absences, they were a choice I made long before I met her. But the way she weaponized that truth against me now felt like a knife twisting in my chest. So this is my fault, then? I asked, my voice quieter, the anger giving way to a hollow ache. I forced you into this? I didn't say that, she whispered, her hands wringing the edge of her robe. But it's not black and white, John. I didn't wake up one day and decide to betray you. It was a million little moments. The nights I ate dinner alone, the mornings I woke up to an empty bed, the birthdays and anniversaries you missed, it all piled up. And what about me? I shot back, my voice rising again. Do you think it's easy for me out there? Do you think I don't miss you? I stare at the stars every night and think about home, about you, about the life I'm trying to build for us. And while I'm doing that, you're, what? Having coffee with Jason? Her face crumpled, but I didn't stop. You think loneliness is exclusive to you, Amy? That I don't feel it too? I've spent years with nothing but the sound of waves and the hum of engines to keep me company, all because I thought it was worth it. I thought you were worth it. Don't you dare, she said, her voice trembling with anger now. Don't you dare make this about you. You don't get to play the martyr here, John. You chose the sea. I didn't. And you chose Jason, I fired back, the words like venom on my tongue. You made a choice, Amy. Just like I did. She didn't respond. Her tears were falling freely now, but they didn't move me. Not this time. I felt unmoored, like a ship that had lost its anchor. The life I thought I knew, the woman I thought I loved, it all felt like a lie. What do you want me to do, Amy? I asked after a long silence. What am I supposed to do with this? I don't know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know how to fix this. Neither did I. For days, the house was a quiet battlefield. Amy and I moved through the same spaces like ghosts, avoiding eye contact, avoiding conversation. The air was thick with words left unsaid, and every creak of the floorboards felt like a scream. At night, I lay awake in our bed, the bed we'd chosen together at a little furniture shop on King Street. I couldn't stop imagining Jason lying where I now lay. I pictured his hand tracing the curve of Amy's waist, his voice whispering things to her that I'd never hear. The thought churned in my gut like a storm, relentless and unyielding. Amy slept in the guest room, or at least I assumed she did. I could hear her footsteps down the hall and the occasional muffled sob through the thin walls. A part of me wanted to go to her, to talk, to fix whatever this had become. But I couldn't bring myself to move. The anger was still there, a constant hum beneath the surface. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls in hues of orange and gold, I found myself in the kitchen, the scene of the crime. My fingers traced the edges of the granite countertop, the one Amy had gushed about when the remodel was done. I imagined Jason standing there, smiling at her, charming her with whatever easy confidence he had. It made me sick. The sound of footsteps pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to see Amy standing in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. She looked tired, worn down, but still beautiful in that way she always had. It hurt to look at her. John, she said, her voice tentative. We need to talk. I leaned back against the counter, crossing my arms. About what? You and Jason? Or should we talk about the other lies you've been keeping from me? Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, I thought she might cry again. But instead, she straightened her back and met my gaze. I want to try, she said softly. I want to fix this. If you'll let me. Fix this? I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my throat. Amy, this isn't something you just patch up with an apology. You broke us. You broke me. I know, she said quickly, her voice cracking. I know I did, and I'm so sorry, John. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Counseling, therapy, anything. Please. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that this could somehow be salvaged. But every time I looked at her, all I could see was Jason's smug face and the life she'd shared with him behind my back. Do you even love me anymore? I asked, my voice quiet but laced with raw vulnerability. Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. I do, John. I swear I do. I got lost. But I want to find my way back. Please. I stared at her for what felt like an eternity, searching her face for some kind of truth. But trust, I realized, wasn't something you could rebuild overnight. It was a slow process, like piecing together a shattered vase. And I didn't know if I had the patience, or the strength, to even try. Amy's plea echoed in my mind long after she left the kitchen. Her words, her tears, they stirred something in me. I didn't know if it was hope or desperation, but it was enough to keep me rooted in the storm of indecision. That night, I sat on the back porch with a bottle of bourbon, staring out at the dark water of the inlet. The gentle lapping of the waves was soothing, but it couldn't drown out the chaos in my head. Images of Amy and Jason looped endlessly, like a reel I couldn't shut off. Was forgiveness even possible? Could I look at her and not see the betrayal? Could I touch her without imagining someone else had been there first? I didn't know. The screen door creaked open, and I didn't have to turn around to know it was Amy. She stepped onto the porch, her presence tentative. She was holding 2 glasses, which she set down on the table before sinking into the chair beside me. For a while, we sat in silence, the only sound the rustle of the wind through the marsh grass. "I've been thinking," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "About us. About everything." I said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "You were right," she admitted. "I made a choice. And it was the wrong one. I let my loneliness turn into resentment, and I used it to justify something that was unforgivable." She paused, her hands trembling as she reached for the glass of bourbon. "But I love you, John. I do. And I want to fix this, even if it takes the rest of my life." Her words hung between us, raw and vulnerable. For the first time in weeks, I saw a glimpse of the woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman who had laughed with me on our wedding day, who had kissed me goodbye at the docks so many times with tears in her eyes. But that woman had also lied to me. Betrayed me. Broken something sacred. "I don't know if I can do this, Amy," I said, my voice low. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might leave. But she stayed, her hands gripping the edge of her chair as though it were the only thing keeping her grounded. "I'll wait," she said, her voice trembling. "As long as it takes. I'll wait for you to decide, John." Her words settled in my chest like a weight. I didn't know if I wanted her to wait or if I wanted her to leave so I could bury this pain and move on. All I knew was that the road ahead felt impossibly long, and I wasn't sure I could walk it. The night stretched on, heavy with unspoken words. And for the first time in years, the sea didn't feel like my mistress, it felt like my only escape. Morning came sluggishly, the gray light seeping through the curtains like a reluctant guest. I hadn't slept much. Amy's words haunted me, replaying in my mind every time I closed my eyes. The house was still when I got up, the silence almost deafening. Amy was asleep in the guest room, I could hear her soft breathing through the door as I passed by. I didn't know what I wanted anymore, if I wanted her to wake up, to fight for me, or if I wanted her to disappear altogether so I didn't have to face what was broken between us. I ended up at the inlet, barefoot in the damp grass, watching the water lap against the shore. This had always been my refuge, my place to think. The salty breeze felt sharp against my skin, a reminder of the world outside my tangled thoughts. The tide was out, and in the distance, a heron stood motionless, watching the horizon. It reminded me of how I often felt at sea, adrift, isolated, but oddly at peace. I thought about Amy, about the life we had built and the cracks that had gone unnoticed until they split us wide open. I thought about Jason, his easy smile and the casual way he had spoken my wife's name. The rage I had felt when I first saw them together was still there, but it had dulled, replaced by something heavier. Resignation, maybe. Could I forgive her? Could I forgive myself for leaving her so often, for not seeing how lonely she had been? These were the questions I turned over in my mind, knowing there were no easy answers. By the time I returned to the house, the sun was climbing higher, casting sharp shadows across the porch. Amy was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in her hands. She looked up when I walked in, her expression guarded, as if bracing herself for whatever was coming next. "I'm going back out," I said, breaking the silence. Her eyes widened slightly, and she set the coffee cup down with trembling hands. "Back to sea?" I nodded. "I need time, Amy. Time to figure out what I want, what we want. I can't do that here." Her lips pressed together, and she looked down at the table. "How long?" she asked quietly. "I don't know." She nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of the coffee cup. "I'll wait," she said, her voice steady despite the tears welling in her eyes. "If that's what it takes, I'll wait for you, John." I didn't reply. I didn't know if her waiting would make a difference. But as I packed my bag and walked out the door, I felt a strange sense of relief. I didn't have answers, but I had space. And maybe, for now, that was enough. The sea was calling, and for better or worse, it was the only place where I could clear my mind and decide whether the life I had with Amy was worth fighting for, or if it was already lost. As I boarded my ship later that evening, I glanced back at the harbor, where the town's lights flickered in the distance. I thought of Amy, sitting alone in our house, waiting for something that might never come. And with the sound of the ship's horn echoing in my ears, I turned my face to the horizon and let the sea carry me away.